for joining our webinar today. Today we will talk about the EB-5 Investor Immigrant Program, and this is a series. This is one in a series of programs that we are putting on for our audience members. Thank you so much for joining. So before we move on, just a quick overview. We have the primary topic obviously is investment-based immigration categories, and which is the EB-5 category. And I've highlighted immigration because there are other categories which are non-immigrant, which are also available for investors. So this program is focused on the immigration part of the program. As you all know, you may have heard in the press, the president issued an executive order suspending immigration for 60 days. And we'll talk some about that because there's some, I'm sure that you have questions about what the impact of the executive order is on the immigration by the investor visa category. We want your questions, so please send them by email. That's my email address on the screen. Hopefully you have all received the slides and can follow along this webinar using the slides. And if you're having any, hopefully you can all see the slides and hear me okay. If not, well, send an email to if Jennifer or myself. I want to say thank you to Jennifer Helfand, who's amazing, and she is our marketing manager, and she is the main person behind these webinars. So I want to thank her for her efforts. The next point that we are going to cover is essentially the executive order, right? So it's known as the proclamation suspending entry of immigrants who present risk to the U.S. labor market during the economic recovery following the COVID-19 outbreak. So that's a pretty long title for the executive order, and you can, if you want to read the full text of it, you can see it right here at this link that I provided. And let's cover some highlights, and those highlights are the entry of aliens into the U.S. Has been suspended for 60 days. For those who are outside of the United States on April 23rd, 2020, who don't have the immigrant visa already, which is a green card, or don't have another official travel document, such as a advanced parole document, and for the most part, if they're not already permanent residents or on their way to becoming permanent residents. What the order does not cover, of course, well, the green card holders and immigrant visas for healthcare professionals and their spouses and children, and this is designed to assist the healthcare workers that are dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. So those doctors and nurses or physical therapists and other allied professionals are exempted. Luckily for our program, like for today, the EB-5 investor program is not impacted. It's specifically excluded. Then you have spouses of U.S. citizens, children of U.S. citizens, law enforcement personnel, U.S. Armed Forces and their spouses and children, special immigrant visas, national interest waivers. This national interest waiver is a topic that will be covered in our next week's session, so we'll send out details of that in an email after the seminar from today and with the recording of today's webinar. And the nice thing is that for those folks who are already in the U.S., they do not see, they're not affected. So folks that are already in the US on some other visa category and, for example, are able to apply for EB5 with some other conditions being met, can still go ahead and apply. So that's the good news. So let's move along. So, okay, so here is the EB5 investor program, which really starts with an understanding of what are the sums of money that we're talking about. And recently, in November of last year, we had an upward revision of the investment thresholds, and which is from the old threshold was for a direct investment with the first level was $1 million. And then there was a second level of a lower amount of a $500,000 investment. And these were specified by the type of investment. And we'll get into some of those details later today in this hour. And those amounts have been raised. So the lower threshold amount is now 900,000, and the upper amount is 1.8 million. Okay. So I just wanted to start with those numbers. So you are talking about a significant investment, and now depending on the preference of the investor, it basically comes down to whether they want to invest in a business they themselves will operate versus investing in a larger investment vehicle in which they themselves are not managing, but they are essentially a passive investor. So those are called as these targeted employment area regional centers. So there's a separate investment in a targeted employment area, and some of those are in regional centers, and I'll get into some of those details in a bit. So our next slide, what I've done, what I want to do is to cover with you essentially some of the background and recent changes to the program, so the trends. And those can be summarized here on this slide, really, which in November 2019, what happened was an effort to modernize the program. There's an issue with the priority date that was addressed, which I'll get to on a later slide. This has to do with the timing of processing these cases. There was an increase in the required minimum investment, which we already spoke about. And this one was important. Like, so reforming the criteria for the targeted employment areas. These are essentially areas where there's a determination that there's a need to improve the economic conditions, and so folks are encouraged to invest in these areas by giving them the lower threshold amount, which is now 900,000. And so the revision there is that the determinations of who decides what is a TEA has been changed. So I believe it's been federalized instead of with the state and local governments that used to make these determinations. Then there's been an attempt. So once a investor invests and then gets their permanent residence after a process, which we'll get to in a bit, they then have 2 years of a permanent resident status, which they then have to renew at the end of the 2 years, which means removal of conditions. So and once they can remove those conditions, then they have a permanent green card, which is then they can basically wind up their investment if they like, or do whatever once that conditions have been removed. And there was other technical and conforming revisions, which we'll see if we can get to in our time, but they can certainly be studied here at this website, the uscis.gov EB5 website. Alrighty, so we already covered these. So the highlighted in yellow on this slide are the new threshold amounts. Okay, so we've already covered that. Okay, so I'm going to try to give just a quick summary. So essentially, the idea is for the EB-5 program to create jobs and give a immigration benefit. Now, this is a way to raise financing, to attract money, which otherwise would not be available. So this is essentially incentivizing folks that are interested in coming to the US or planning a future for their children in the US to receive an immigration benefit. So the spouses and children under 21 that are unmarried can come to the US. So folks are incentivized to invest in this program. Now, the burden is on the investor to show how the investment will create jobs. Okay, and then we have to show that the investment funds have been lawfully obtained. All right, and then the next choice that the investor has to make is whether they are going to do a direct EB-5, which means starting their own business or purchasing an existing business and running it themselves and creating jobs, versus investing in a regional center, which there are several regional centers all over the US. One of the ones in Washington D.C. area, one of the many in this area is the Southwest Waterfront, where they have a ton of new restaurants and hotels and a lot of very nice space that was funded by a EB-5 investors. And what they do is the regional center management collects a group of 200 or 300 EB-5 investors and raises 500,000 from them, each one of them, and then creates a huge fund, and then partners with other entities. They may partner with a bank or with a government, and they then take on the responsibility of creating the jobs and showing that there's compliance and providing the investor with all the documents needed to prove the business side of things. So in terms of new regulations and new legislation, so we've had an update in November. Going forward, now with the COVID-19 crisis, my own feeling is that there's going to be a push to make this program even more attractive, to build up the economy, to make up for the lost jobs, and to help help us get back on our feet as a nation. So I feel personally that we may see more priority given to this program. So the Immigrant Investor Program office is in Washington, D.C., and there's a lot of resources available on locating EB-5 centers and getting all the support necessary in order to help investors and perhaps their US-based partners. I wanted to clarify the difference between the US green card and US citizenship. This program does not lead to US citizenship. It provides a green card, which then after getting a green card, the individuals have to meet the conditions of residency and pay taxes on worldwide income. And then once they've been in the US for 5 years after getting that permanent green card, they can become a US citizen. As a permanent resident for 5 years, they can get US citizenship. The next slide, I wanted to go over some of the different components, right? The different entities and people involved in making an EB-5 immigration application a success. So you've got the immigrant investors, who then have to identify the regional centers if they're doing an EB-5, the lower level investment. There has to be a new commercial enterprise, and then a job creating entity, which are both related. And if you've got a regional center, then you have an EB5 project developer. Then certainly you need somebody like me or one of my colleagues in the immigration bar to assist with the immigration part. There is a securities component because on the regional center side, there is a transaction involved, and so there's a business and securities attorney involved. And the economist, if when they're using a certain type of investment where let's say it's a regional center, or even if it's a direct investment, and if there's not a direct job creation, so if the investor themselves can't show that they're creating the required number of jobs directly within their own business, there is an indirect job creation component, which for example, in a regional center, they can show that overall in the community, in the economy, this project will create additional jobs. And so under certain conditions, those jobs can be counted towards the application for immigration. And so that's where an economist fits in. So it's a big project doing an EB5 case, or it's one of the more complex cases. So the steps involved, all right? So as an immigration attorney, if I am approached by a client or potential client, what I will do is, number one, I will help determine the lawful source of funds plan, which is quite critical in demonstrating that the funds were earned lawfully. And that's where an attorney helps. Often we also use accountants to help in that process, depending upon how complex the money trail is. Now, we can also guide clients in locating a regional center. We can't recommend or endorse a particular regional center because that's not our expertise. We are legal experts, but not financial experts. And a lot of these types of offerings are regulated by the SEC, and there are financial rules and controls, and certainly it's a business decision that has to be done with a lot of due diligence to the financials and a vetting of the project, and looking at its historical record. And so most attorneys will be reluctant to endorse a regional center. However, we can say that, hey, here's centers where we've sent clients to before. Here's like how to look up all the centers in the country and make a determination of what are the best performing and reliable centers, because people that invest are generally very keen on not losing their principal amounts. Okay, so once all that assessment and pre-processing is done, then the first form that's filed is the Form I-526, Immigrant Petition by Alien Entrepreneur. Okay, so that's the main form that's filed that has all the supporting documentation of the income, the business, the financials, all of these evidence that proves that we meet our criteria, and then we wait. Once that form is approved, the next stage is, and then this is a timing issue, you've got to wait until you are able to file these forms. If you're already in the US, you file a Form I-485 for yourself and your family. And then after that processing is done, then a conditional green card is produced for the beneficiary and their dependents. Okay, if the investor is outside the US, then they need to file a DS-260, which is essentially like a application with a foreign embassy for the processing of their green card application, which means that for current situation, the embassies are essentially not working. So despite the executive order, this is not clear when people will be actually able to get a green card. All right, and then finally, after 2 years of the investment having been made and being still in place, and the conditions still being satisfied at the end of the 2 years, then the investor can file a Form 829 to remove the conditions and then get their permanent green card. Okay, so let's move on to now talking about some of the details. Okay, so you've selected your EB-5 project, you've collected your source of fund documents, then made the EB-5 investment, then filed the I-526 like we've talked, done the consular processing or adjustment of status, spent the 2 years of conditional permanent residence, and then file the I-829. So that's the complete process. Okay, so at the end of that last step, you've got a green card, and then that's it. You can wind up your investment. You can do basically you're not tied to your investment anymore. And then you just have to worry about maintaining permanent residence, which is not spending more than 6 months outside the country, and then eventually becoming a citizen. Let's look at the source of funds, because I find that interesting, and it can be complicated because your investors are going to be coming from all different parts of the world, from all different demographics and socioeconomic situations, where you have business people, you have a lot of different kinds of profiles of how people earn money, and convincing the USCIS that the money is lawfully earned is very important. So in order to do that, to build a good source of funds plan, I've listed here 6 components, which they are guides towards gathering the relevant data, and that data is certainly personal and business taxes for 5 years that show that you've made income that supports the investment amount. So business and tax returns are considered reliable. Some countries don't have that kind of documentation. If they're like, I do get folks from the UAE that they tell me, hey, there's no tax here, so then we have to look at other types of government charges and other ways of proving up income. Bank statements are obviously like kind of self-explanatory. It's useful that you have a proper banking tracing of funds through bank accounts makes it very helpful. What we can do is also submit financial statements. If they're audited, that's even better. We need to show if business registrations. Sale of property is interesting. Like, I do get a lot of folks who are wanting to sell a home or other property and move those funds to the US, and they inherited the home from their parents, or they bought it 40 years ago and it's appreciated now. So you do have to go back all the way to when the purchase was made. So and try, if you can, to get documents showing what the value was and what the appreciation was, and even showing the source of the original funds used to acquire that property. So I mean, all of this is within reason, because certainly sometimes it's very hard to get a hold of like historical documents, but then we try to create affidavits from people who know and provide as much evidence as we can. And then the last one is copies of judgments or evidence of all pending government or other actions from any court that have an impact on this issue. So let me see. I wanted the next slide to address some advanced issues. I have a question. I'm going to just take it. I have a question that says, how does this program compare to the long-standing Canadian program? Does the Canadian system grant citizenship if a particular immigrant were indifferent about Canada or the US? Where should she go? It's a good question. I have just academic knowledge of the Canadian system. I'm not an expert. Um, you know, and they administer it. In the US, we have a federal system. Um, so it's the USCIS that's administering it. The Canadian program, as far as I know, it's been delegated to their provinces or, you know, states, or you know, they call them provinces. And so each province has its own. From what I can tell, there some of them are certainly easier than the US system. Um, some of them have lower financial requirements, and also less burdensome requirements in terms of the business specifications. So I do feel that there are some investors that prefer going to Canada. Um, Now, in terms of citizenship, again, I'm not an expert on the Canadian piece, but I do believe in that part it's similar to the US, that the individual first becomes what they call a landed permanent resident, similar to the US green card, and then they have to stay there for a certain number of time. I mean, a certain period of time to then accumulate enough residence to become a citizen. And it may be lower than what the US requires, 5 years total. The Canadian program may require less. They may require 3 years to become a Canadian citizen. But I'd be happy to, like, you know, discuss this offline, and even if needed, direct you to a Canadian friend of mine that does a lot of this work. So thanks for asking that question. Um, so the other question was, is premium processing available now for the I-526 or I-829? And unless they updated it like recently, it's not. Like, premium processing is suspended for all applications. So that was, the premium processing was the 2-week turnaround on processing, where you pay an extra fee to the government of approximately $1,500 and get a processing done within 15 days, or some response from the government in 15 days. But unfortunately, that's been suspended. And so now it's several months, and I'll get to the timing in a couple of slides. I talk about the timing overall. So yeah, thanks for that question, and you can certainly please send me a email with more detailed questions. You know, I think that what we can do is look at some of these nuts and bolts issues. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that in the evidence part, it's important to demonstrate the job creation. Okay, so on an EB5 direct, it's a lot more burden on the investor, because let's say they start a hotel and they put their money in a hotel, and then they've created a bunch of jobs, and then at the end of the 2 years, they have to show that, you know, they have these employees, they paid them, you know, their W-2s and tax returns, etc. So in that situation, the project has been successful and they've demonstrated that they've met their stated goal. But what if the project fails, and in 2 years they've not created those jobs? So then, you know, they're kind of in a bad situation. If, you know, so it depends on what the objectives are. So I generally try to, you know, if someone's like has the money and wants to get the green card, then I will say to them that it's a lot easier, cheaper to go for a regional center, where the regional center takes off that headache and can demonstrate the job creation. If somebody's really keen on running their own business and they have their own passion for doing something, they can do it, but they do take the risk. So business plan is very important. So folks engage business plan writers. I've got a slide hitting on the different components of the business plan later on. And the economic methodologies, again, that show the indirect creation of jobs, and you know, even within the overall application package for any type of investment, the economic forecast is important. So it helps the case and makes the officer understand how these jobs will be created. And then at the I-526 and the I-829, which is the initial packet and the subsequent packet, there's a different, certainly because there's a different review, because at the I-829 stage, you've got a track record, whereas at the 526 stage, some of it was forecasting. So among other things, these two applications have to be handled very carefully for a successful outcome. Now, one of the things is that, I mean, some people ask me, like, how do I, I want a green card, but I want my money back, and will I get my money back? How soon can I get it back? And will I get a return on my investment? And those are, generally if they're going into a regional center, then the regional centers have a fixed term commitment, usually 6 years, 5 years, 6 years of commitment of the $900,000. And then at the end of that time frame, so that's more of a business transaction. That's not really related to the immigration law. That's a business transaction. And so the funds are returned per a contract. Now, there may or may not be a return on the funds. So generally, people are looking at getting their principal back. And so, they have to think about what their financial goals are, and, can they set aside this money for a good chunk of time. And also, the regional center profile and the regional center's goals play a part. So there's a discussion, a conversation with the regional center in terms of what they will do with the money, when will the money be refunded, what are the securities offered, in case of a failure. So those are all business things that have to be discussed fully with the regional center. And next, let's move to the targeted employment area designation. Okay, so now, like I said before, the USCIS will review and determine the designation of high unemployment targeted employment areas. And they said that they will no longer defer to the decisions made by state and local governments. In any geographic area, there are TEAs where have clients that invest in TEAs. They can do a direct investment, or they can do a regional center and use that lower financial amount. And okay, so let's see. So I have here like a diagram I wanted to show you with the essentially the direct EB5 investment model, where the EB5 investor is starting a their own business, right? So they have to put their money at risk, and venture with the immigration application, and then at the end, if there's a they can show after 2 years that they've met the criteria, then they can get their money back, and they don't have to stay invested in the project. Now, let me see if you have another I think this area deserves some elaboration. Is now what happens in a regional center model. So here you can see it's more complicated, right? So the chart, you have the investors that are like a bunch of investors get together. The regional center managing partner is sort of like the point person coordinating the funds, the contract with the EB5 investors, the project company, which is the new commercial enterprise, where each investor has certain ownership in. And then there's the investment, which is the actual, physical infrastructure of the, whatever they're doing, building a mall, building a hotel, building any kind of project. You have nursing homes, you have all sorts of businesses that are that raise capital from EB5 investments. Okay, so now you may want, obviously get an idea of the timing. And this was a portrait slide. I try to put it into landscape here, so I'm sorry if it's not very clear. If anybody wants, I can send you this separately as an email attachment. So the first part here, right, is your at the top you've got the processing of doing the initial in blue. Like this can be done in about a month's time, like if the investor is serious and prepared to move ahead. And then the filing of the I-526, which can take more than a year, like a year and a half. Okay, so 14 to 18 months is that time frame. Once that's approved, then, like we said before, these two, like this branches out into the two different avenues. Like if you're already in the US, then you can file for adjustment of status, come down this road, or if you're outside, then you come down this road, which is applying to that consulate, and that's about a 6 to 10 month process. And then you finally, like after waiting for about 21, 24 months, that's the 2-year period, you apply for the I-529, and that then takes another 18 to 20 months. And and then at the end of it, you can then, when the this is for a regional center, for example, at the end of the investment term, then the investor can get their funds back, right? So I wanted to quickly like go over some comparisons, because the EB-5 is the immigrant visa, right? But it's not the only type of vehicle that folks can use to invest in the US and come and live here. The L1, the E1 and E2 are non-immigrant visas that can be used to come into the US quicker, and then you can later on explore EB-5s, and then while being in the US apply for an EB-5. And so that's a way to like get to the country quicker, right? So the issue with the L is that it is, the investor has to have the L1 beneficiary has to have been employed by a foreign company for at least 1 year, that then transfers them to the US to start a new company or to buy an existing company and be a CEO level person and be in the US, and then they can be exploring another investment while they're doing that. But they need to have that foreign company be operational, and that link then have common ownership. On the E1 and E2, they can be a fresh, brand new investment. There's no threshold. Like folks invest with, 100,000 would be safe, but folks have done less than 100,000, and you can invest more. And it can be a brand new startup, or it can be an existing purchase of like a restaurant or a hotel or retail, anything, IT companies. The only issue there is that they're limited to certain countries only. So China and India are not in that treaty. Brazil is not in that treaty. A lot of countries are not in the E1, E2 treaty country list. Okay, so what I have here now, I won't spend a whole lot of time, but this may be useful, and you can consult these slides later. This is a comparison in the E1, E2, L1, EB-5. Okay, so based on who can apply, what they have to do in the US when they get here, what is the minimum investment requirement, and so forth. I will say that the E2 and the L1 are, compared to an EB-5 investment, the E2 and the L1, if they're available, are much quicker to process and to enter the US. Now, obviously, with the embassies all being shut down, they're all sort of like put on hold. So it's not like, in the current environment, any one of them is quicker than another. They're all just kind of stopped right now. Okay, so what do you have to do? Like this slide tells you if you need a foreign company affiliation. It tells you whether you have a job creation requirement. And those creation requirements on the L and the E are certainly less burdensome than the EB-5. And the one thing to note is that the E1 and the E2, which is like E1 is treaty trader, E2 is treaty investor, And so those distinctions are important to note, but they don't lead to a green card directly on their own. An E2 investment can lead to EB5 green card. So if one starts with a low-level investment and then keeps investing until the total investment reaches 900,000, then that company, if they qualify, they've created the 10 jobs, they can apply for an EB5 after their E2 is a success. But they have to show that they've reinvested earnings into the business. So that's one way to do it. The L1A on its own can turn into a green card if the person's business is thriving and they're able to show that the home company is still connected to the US company and they're still a manager or executive after 1 year, 1 year of the US business being operational. They can apply for an EB1 multinational manager or executive category. And then the EB5 we already talked about. They filed the I-526 and the I-829 and they have their green card. This talks about the dependents, whether they can work and what their statuses are in the different categories. So the EB5, the spouses and children under 21 can join and they can get their green cards that way. The E1, E2, L1, I mean, they have benefits for the spouses and children. The children have to be under 21, but then they don't really turn into green cards. Okay, so quick concept that's useful is the priority dates on the visa bulletin, and this website explains a lot more detail about it, but I want to quickly touch on it. And the reason it's important is that every year there's a certain allocation per country and visa type that determines whether one can get even after the approved initial 26, investors have to wait for their priority dates to become current. So to then take the next step of actually applying for the green card or applying for the immigrant visa at the consulate. And in this is a document or a set of data that gets generated every month by the State Department, and it's known as the visa bulletin. And it's by different categories. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5th is the non-regional center EB5, and then there's another one below that, which is the regional center EB5. The dates look like they're pretty much the same. But what that means is that for a Chinese national, right now they're processing applications from May of 2015. So a Chinese investor has to wait about 5 years before they can apply for a green card. India is also backlogged, and so is Vietnam. So India is not so bad right now. I feel that that's improved, and I think all these dates have improved a little bit actually. At least I feel that way. That I think just not too long ago they were very backlogged, and I wonder if it's because the investment threshold was increased. But anyway, so you have to be mindful that it's for some of these countries, they won't immediately get a green card, or even within like 2 years or so. It's a good chunk of time to wait. So for some of them, an L might make sense, or if they have some other kind of category, an H if they qualify, and then also invest. But anyway, so that's the visa bulletin, and this changes every month. So it may speed up, it may slow down again. And so we constantly watch these charts. Okay, so I think we've covered most of the EB5 related material. This is just some advice to once they've got their green card, they have to be aware of the things they need to do to maintain their permanent resident status. So they have to spend the majority of time in the US, have their domicile in the US, and if they take trips that are longer than 6 months, then they have to be very careful when they come back to keep a very good record of evidence that they can demonstrate that they have not given up their residence in the US. So it's just not enough that they've got an investment in the US and therefore they can keep their green card. They may lose it if they're not living here in the US. And these are some exceptions for green card holders that are living overseas, which basically means that you can get like a returning residence permit, to get a re-entry permit or returning resident permit. If you have to go outside the country for longer than 1 year, you can get this 2-year permit and renew it for up to 4 years, I feel, and you can still renew it even more than that, but typically I've seen 4 is sort of the limit. Okay, so I wanted to just take a minute or two on consular processing. The issue there is that, right, as you know, the embassies are all shut down. So we don't, I mean, they say that some embassies are taking emergency appointments. They say that some visas are being issued for healthcare professionals, but I have honestly not, since the COVID shutdown, I've really not seen any movement at all, at least for any of my clients. So for some of them, I'm trying, like we work with senators' offices, we work with the families if there's a real emergency, like someone's, in critical health situation. I have things like that pending, but I am still waiting for positive results. So and then even with the embassies being open, there are delays on background checks and administrative processing. So those have to be kept in mind pretty much for generally any type of situation. So so that brings us really to the end of our topic on EB-5s. If you have questions or comments, please email me. We'll be sending the slides out later. Let me quickly just review some of the things. I have a few questions here. Let me see if I can try to give quick answers. I'm just trying to go through here. Okay. Okay. Okay, so one of these questions says, will USCIS count as new jobs the following? EB-5 creates the new US enterprise, acquires assets of the existing one, and hires the same employees that used to work for the seller's company. Yeah, so that's a great question. So the standard, what they have to show is that, I mean, it's ideal to have like 10 brand new jobs. So to add to those, not like existing jobs, but add 10 more jobs. If they're using the existing employees, then they have to get into showing that but for the investment, those jobs would be lost. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to show that try to use indirect job creation. So like, because this enterprise is functional, it employs all these other vendors and it permits all this other economic activity. So show those 10 jobs. But my sense is that on if you're only trying to use those 10 jobs that are existing jobs, that's going to be tricky on its own. It may get pushback and some more requests for evidence that you're actually adding jobs. So thanks for that question. I'd be happy to discuss more specifics offline. So send me an email. Yeah, I've had a lot of like successful cases. So despite all the worry and panic and uncertainty, it's still a good time to certainly the administration favors EB-5. They've said so in this executive order. These are projects that take a long time, so it's not instant gratification. It has to be these have to be thought through, planned, all teed up over a period of time. So hopefully this we get through the COVID crisis and then things start picking up again. So it's worth assessing, looking. Oh, I do feel that there's been I've had calls from folks overseas that have the sense that because of the economic downturn, now is a time for getting some good deals on investments. And so for the E's and the L's and even the EB5, that may be a good time to really look out for such opportunities and connect the right people to the right professionals here. Okay, so having said that, I'm excited to announce the next webinar. It's a fun webinar. Hope you will be able to join. And it's called Models, Scientists, Athletes, and Other Stars. And it's really open to any professional or with any vocation that's at a high level that's considered as a extraordinary ability or exceptional ability. The national interest waiver is a little bit different because it focuses on the national interest, but certainly does tie into a person's abilities. But these are the EB1, EB2, and O visas. So we'll talk about those next week, and we'll be sending out an invite to that. I want to say, if you liked the webinar, please share the recording on your social media. If you have any comments, feedback, things you liked, things you didn't like, topics that you would like to explore further, and even anything about the logistics of how we do these, like the audio, the slides, right? Just the way you're receiving this information. If you'd prefer a different format, let us know. And with that, I want to conclude by thanking you, by wishing all of you health and safety, you and your loved ones. We're all going through this tough time, just a completely different way of experiencing life. I'm just sending all of you good wishes, and stay tuned for our next webinar, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Thanks so much. Bye.